In a league known for its intensity, unpredictability, and fierce competition, one team did the impossible. Arsenal 2003-2004, 38 games, 26 wins, 12 draws, and 0 losses. A golden Premier League trophy, a legacy that still hasn't been matched. Today, this is the story of Arsenal's Invincibles, the most iconic season in Premier League history. To understand the achievement, you need to understand the era. This was the Premier League at its fiercest. Manchester United were reigning giants, Chelsea were rising fast under Roman Abramovich, and Arsenal, well, they were already good, but not yet legendary. After narrowly missing out on the title in 2002-2003, Arsène Wenger made a bold statement. I think we can go unbeaten all season. Everyone laughed until they didn't. You know, this wasn't just a team. This was a perfectly constructed machine. You know, at the back, they had Jens Lehmann, Sol Campbell, Kolo Toure, Ashley Cole, one of the best left backs, if not the best left back in Premier League history. In midfield, you had Gilberto Silva, the man they used to call the Invisible Wall, and of course he was partnered alongside one of the greatest Premier League winning captains, one of the greatest players of the Premier League era of his generation, won World Cups, of course won Premier Leagues, one of the best players we've ever seen here in England, and that was Patrick Vieira, the absolute ultimate captain. On the wings, of course, they had Pires and Freddie Ljungberg. You know, they provided the pace, the creativity, the goals. And I think more importantly as well, something probably that they're quite underrated for is the fact that they actually offered balance, both on the left and on the right-hand side. You had Pires, who was probably more of a player who at times could deem, you know, seemingly be quite selfish in terms of the way that he, of course, played. But, you know, Pires was a top player, you know, at that period of time. And then you've kind of got this selflessness of Freddie Ljungberg, someone who probably wasn't blessed with as much skill as, you know, the Henrys, the Bergkamps and the Pireses, you know, in the team. But he would work his socks off and he could provide you with important goals, you know, in a season. And he just seemed like such a vital player within the cog that was Arsenal at the time. And, you know, you guys can see, you know, probably the scorer of has to be the greatest goal that we've probably ever seen, the greatest bit of skill that we've seen that has led to a goal ever in Premier League history. Of course, you had the Dutch genius, I will call him that, which is Dennis Bergkamp. You know, he was an absolutely phenomenal player, wasn't someone who was blessed with an abundance of pace, wasn't someone who, you know, even had so much skill, but what he did have was the IQ of Albert Einstein. This guy was absolutely brilliant and was an absolutely fantastic servant of the football club. And then, of course, you know, last but not least, you know, he was a decent player, you know, another one of the French contingent that joined Arsène Wenger when he moved to Arsenal back in the late 90s. He was okay, I would say, you know, wasn't the greatest. Now I'm joking. Listen, you're talking about probably the greatest Premier League player of all time. I know that there's 100 debates. I know that everybody wants to put other people into conversations of, you know, this player here. You know, Thierry Henry was just different gravy. That season, you know, in itself, he was absolutely mental. But just him as a player, for what he brought to the Premier League, for what he was for the Premier League, the style, the elegance, the swag, you know, everything. Heck, he was the reason that so many kids growing up wanted to play football wearing long sleeves and black gloves, black night gloves to be exact. Thierry Henry was just an absolute beast. He was an absolute animal, one of the greatest players I've ever seen, you know, kick a football, you know, and he was easily one of the greatest players of his generation, of this generation, of the generation before, and probably the future generation. Honestly, whether you are an Arsenal fan or not, and I know Manchester United were their fiercest rivals at that time, and, you know, other clubs, we just couldn't really match the quality. Listen, I think most of us sat there in envy looking at this team and just looking throughout the entire team. They had everything that you could possibly need in order for you to go and at least win a championship, let alone go invincible. Power, speed, leadership, technical brilliance, and then the genius of a manager. A manager who was a bit of at this point he was a known entity, but came in as an unknown entity and completely took the Premier League by storm. They had players from all different countries, from all different places of planet Earth, and we were just all in awe and envy. That season did start off quite strongly for Arsenal, winning 2-1 against Everton. But if I'm being honest, it wasn't really just about the wins that season. Of course, they had quite a lot of draws, and that kind of tells you the kind of season that they were having. That kind of tells you the resilience that they had within the squad. We also remember a stunning hat-trick from Thierry Henry in a 5-0 victory against Leeds United. Probably one of the best games that I've actually seen from an individual player. He absolutely tore that Leeds defence to parts. And of course, we cannot forget the 0-0 against Manchester United, where Ruud van Nistelrooy missed a penalty, and the actions of a certain Martin Keown, amongst other players, that obviously following that penalty miss. That was probably one of the most intense 0-0 games at Old Trafford that I have ever seen in Premier League history. And again, like I said before, Manchester United, Arsenal, they were absolutely fierce rivals. There was a level of hate between the two clubs that we probably haven't seen in the game of football ever really since then. Probably testament as well to the quality, of the Premier League during that period of time. It wasn't just about, the two teams in Arsenal and Manchester United. You still had quite a lot of teams who had some really good players. I mean, Leeds United did have some good players. Liverpool were a pretty decent team, coming off the back of a couple of seasons before that, winning the treble and things like that. Manchester United, of course, Chelsea, in and around and amongst kind of things as well. So yeah, it was a really, really good league with some real top quality players in most of the teams in that league. And then, of course, to kind of crown things off, what's probably the best way that, if you could choose a stadium to win a Premier League title, where would you want to win it? Now, of course, you probably think, I'd love to win it at home. And I think that's probably number one. But if it's not at home, if you can seal the title at your rivals, your neighbours, the team that you probably hate the most out of anybody else in the entire league, it doesn't get more Arsenal than that. And of course, they sealed the Premier League title, drawing 2-2 against Arsenal. Honestly, sometimes you can't write the scripts. And I think from this point on, from when they sealed the league here, I think you almost knew that something special was going to happen come the end of the season. It just seemed like, of course, like you're just getting tested all the time in so many different ways, during that season. And every single time, every single game, they were coming out unbeaten. And it was just a case of, you didn't know if it was going to be the next game, if they went 1-0 down, the mentality of the players, of the team in those games that they would go 1-0 down. It was absolutely brilliant, that season. And again, like I say, to go an entire season unbeaten is... You cannot write that. You cannot write that. And the sheer fact that there's only been one other team prior to that in England to have done that kind of tells you the kind of history Arsenal were making at this point in time. And again, it was extremely tough to even go a season during that period of time and only lose one game, let alone lose no games, whatsoever. Heck, even 3 games, you'd think, I had a pretty decent season. I've only got caught out 3 times this year. The fact that they didn't get caught out once, absolutely brilliant. This team, it wasn't just, the technical ability, the brilliance that they had. They were mentally quite ruthless. You had the likes of the Vieiras, the Jens Lehmanns, who brought fire to the team. You had the players like a Dennis Bergkamp who would bring calm. And, of course, Arsène Wenger, he gave the team freedom, the intelligence and a belief that they were rewriting football history. Even when trailing or off form, they refused to break. So, no team in the Premier League since has matched their mental strength over 38 games. And we've had some pretty good teams in the Premier League history, in the Premier League era, but none of them have matched what Arsenal did this season. And on the 15th of May, 2004, they finished it. 38 games, invincible, the only team to have been awarded a golden Premier League trophy. Wenger didn't just win a league, he created a football myth. And for all the brilliance of all of these modern teams that we have seen, whether it's Manchester City with Pep Guardiola and their kind of dominance over the Premier League, as of recent years, especially in the last decade, to Liverpool's record-breaking seasons, none of these teams have finished unbeaten. So, unfortunately for them, Arsenal's Invincibles stand alone. Over 2 decades have gone by. Arsenal still haven't won a Premier League trophy since this season, but kids, growing up hearing the name Invincibles, like it's folklore, because it is. Football has changed, the pace, the tactics, the money, everything that's involved. But no one has ever gone unbeaten, since that point. So Arsenal's Invincibles, they weren't just a team, they were a statement, a legend, a myth. It's a reminder of what happens when talent, vision, and belief come together so perfectly. If you're an Arsenal fan, a Premier League diehard, or you just love football history, make sure you guys hit that like button, drop your favorite Invincibles moments in the comment section. Make sure you subscribe for more classical football stories, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.